Hi folks, Carl James here from Electric Media Madness, joining me today for a very short little Strange Tales today. I just wanted to talk about something that I've been recently reading about. I am fascinated by this idea of synchronicity. This idea that if you start a film and then you start an album and you play them, mute the sound for the film and play musical cues and things like that, and on the albums sync up with things that you visually see on screen. One of my very favourites actually is Radiohead, OK Computer, which does seem to synchronise quite well with The Matrix, the original Matrix film. I've heard apparently there's an absolutely hilarious one out there where if you play REM's, I think it was Automatic for the People, if you play it over the top of Grease, the film Grease, it syncs up, and it's hilarious the way it syncs up as well. And of course there's the most famous one of all, Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, which does sync up with The Wizard of Oz. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Why I wanted to do this video actually was because I wanted to talk about this idea of synchronicity, but I just wanted to, and I wanted to talk about Pink Floyd, but I wanted to go back to the Stanley Kubrick well for this one a little bit as well, because in an earlier episode of Strange Tales I talked about the idea of Clockwork Orange and a mind control, and I touched on the subject in that video of the CIA and LSD and connections to Stanley Kubrick through the imagery of 2001, the Stargate sequence of people who were going and watching the film and tripping out on acid and all sorts of things, having this sort of out there experience by, you know, a combination of hallucinogenics and the visuals of what they were seeing on the screen. Another thing that syncs up there is, so you have the counterculture scene and ultimately the involvement of the CIA. You have things like mind control and stuff like that, and you had the LSD thing going on, it was steered by the CIA in the late 60s. And then within that period of time you also have the trippy tunes, psychedelic trippy tunes of progressive rockers at the time, Pink Floyd. And it turns out that there does seem to be these synchronicities and connections with all of this. Obviously, people, a great researcher to look into is Mark Devlin's books, Musical Truth. I have them here somewhere, Musical Truth 1, 2 and 3. Really worth checking out, looking into the darker heart of the music industry. And one of the most fascinating stories with that is Pink Floyd, because there are establishment connections with Pink Floyd. People out there have held up the likes of Roger Waters as being this progressive who talks about some of the darker things that are going on in the world, and I think he's very much a limited hangout because he doesn't go where he needs to go with a lot of these subjects. But anyway, I'll come back to Roger Waters in a minute, because I wanted to talk first of all about another synchronicity you have, which is not so much an album, but it's the track Echoes, which is taken from Pink Floyd's 1971 album, which if you start the track Echoes at the very beginning of the Stargate sequence, they last for the same amount of time, the 23 minutes, and the changes in the music seems to follow the changes in the imagery that you see in the Stargate sequence. There is this claim that Kubrick made 2001 with Pink Floyd's music in mind, and there was a claim as well that he was playing Pink Floyd's music all the time on set and while he was working on the film and stuff like that, and he temp tracks of Pink Floyd songs and things like that. And I don't know how true that is. Despite the claims that Kubrick made the film with his, it's obvious that the band was still in their Syd Barrett, see Emily Play Arnold Lane sort of phase at that point. They really weren't going into that full sort of metal Dark Side of the Moon kind of territory at that point then. So would that music have synced up then with what Kubrick was trying to do? It's doubtful. They hadn't been experimenting with that album spanning sort of audio operas at that point in time, so that I'm not sure about that idea. But it's entirely possible that the band themselves, Pink Floyd, was inspired by 2001, specifically the Stargate sequence, when they designed and sound engineered Echoes so that it fit the Stargate sequence after the fact. But that idea that Pink Floyd does link with other things, I'm going to go back to that in a minute, because apparently Roger Waters says no, it doesn't. But anyway, but Roger Waters, bass player, key songwriters with Pink Floyd, he revealed a significant connection to Kubrick when he was recording his solo album Amused to Death, and the album was released in 1992, and it was inspired by the book Amusing Ourselves to Death, which is a fantastic book. And that album featured scathing criticisms of the first Gulf War, George Bush Sr. And according to, I don't like this source, but this is one where I was trying to sort of crib something more sort of generic about this subject matter. This is from Wikipedia. Waters stated in an interview with Rockline on 8th of February 1993 that he wanted to use samples of HAL 9000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey on the album. Stanley Kubrick, the director, turned him down on the basis that it would open the door to many other people using the sound sample. original. Others think that Kubrick refused because Pink Floyd had not allowed him to use music from Atom Heart Mother in his film A Clockwork Orange. There is a backmasked message on Amused to Death that appears in the song Perfect Sense Part 1, in which Waters' backmasked voice says, "Julia, however, in light and visions of the issue of Stanley, we have changed our mind. We have decided to include a backward message, Stanley, for you and all the other book burners." Now, I have actually got this track. I have played it backwards, and he does say that, so that's legit. It does say that, so Wikipedia is actually correct on this point. It does say that in the song. And Waters had a long fascination with the larger sort of agenda scope and certain esoteric issues. Like I say, I'm very much of the argument that he's a bit like sort of the shall we say the Russell Brands of the world, where he cherry picks safe things and things like that, and he will not go where things really need to go in terms of alternative knowledge research. But good nevertheless. I'm not bashing on Russell Brand because he put some great stuff out there, but there's a lot of stuff that you won't touch with a barge pole, and I wish he would. But and that's been true for a long time, even before the censorship was nowhere near as bad as it is now on YouTube. He would not go into, where did the towers go with 9/11 and things like that, but that's a subject for another time. So we have Floyd's classic album, Dark Side of the Moon, a moon nod to Kubrick, maybe. And there was a mockumentary, we shall call, was Dark Side of the Moon, which was an attempt to put out a load of disinformation and limited hangout on this idea of Kubrick being involved with the moon landings and all that kind of thing. But that's another synchronicity there anyway. So we have what I talked about, the synchronization of The Wizard of Oz with Dark Side of the Moon. And don't forget that The Wizard of Oz is readily associated with things like Disney, mind control symbolism, dissociating triggers. What else? There's all manner of things in that film. You also have like the occult with the Aleister Crowley, the Liber stuff, things like that. So there's a specific person that quite often when you search around, certainly the Wayback Engines on the internet, you'll find this person regularly accredited as being the discoverer. Who they saw, I think it was probably just a load of people who were getting stoned in a college or something. Kicked back, happened to be Wizard of Oz on the telly. Dark Side of the Moon was playing, and thought, what the hell, But anyway, this person is regularly accredited as discovering the Dark Side of Oz, synchronicity as we'll call it. And before I come to who this person is, I just want to read you something from the following article. It's 1997 by Bill Frost, entitled Dark Side of the Rainbow in the Pink with Dorothy at Ground Zero, where this person that I'm going to refer to in question is seemingly directly quoted in the article. So this is the person, I'm going to tell you who this person is in a minute, but I want to read out a quote from him first. He said, "I have never said that I sat down and synchronized the whole movie before this. I've merely stated that back in 1979 when I was in high school, I fell asleep with Dark Side of the Moon on the turntable, playing side 2 continuously. When I woke up, The Wizard of Oz was on TV. The Scarecrow was dancing to that insane music while the album was playing. The lunatic is on the grass. It's the funniest damn thing I'd ever seen." So, who is the identity of this person who allegedly discovered the infamous mashup of Floyd and Oz? Well, it's none other than this chap called Clyde Lewis. And if you go into the Clavius Base website, which I think is still around, you will find an article. Basically, it was an exercise in limited hangout. People credit it, and people still do now actually, in quite a number of sources, they credit it as the evidence that Stanley Kubrick was involved in faking the moon landings, the Apollo moon landings on a soundstage. That Kubrick had this brother called Raoul, which he didn't. And there's loads and loads of factual inaccuracies in this article. But because of the initial claim put out in the article, and because it was probably the first time that it had appeared on a widespread scale on the internet, in the heyday in the 1990s, people were first starting to get computers in their homes and things like that, and exploring the internet, the wild frontier of the internet as it was in them days. This article was being repeated verbatim everywhere. From that popularized the idea that Stanley Kubrick, but it was based on a lot of factual inaccuracies, and of course it therefore served as a good way to debunk the idea that Kubrick, whether you accept the idea that Kubrick was involved or not, I don't know. I think there's a lot of evidence that Kubrick knew about it, but I would not go to the position of yes, he was definitely involved, because I've yet to see concrete evidence that he was actually involved in any kind of Apollo cover-up, fakery or anything like that. But I think he knew about it. I definitely think he knew about it. I'm certain of that. I think he alluded to it in a lot of his material, a lot of his creative work that he put out there. People forget, as I've mentioned this many, many times in my research, that the idea, the connection between Kubrick and Apollo fakery was floated by Bill Casey barely a year after 1969, way back. But obviously at that point, what he was putting out there, his research, so We Never Went to the Moon, his book that he did at the time, didn't reach the widespread domain of the world in the same way that this article did during the 1990s on the internet. So you go to We Never Went to the Moon, you've got some really good solid stuff there. And there's a lot to do with Bill Casey, which I'm going to get into in another video, actually, which connects to things like Peter Hyams and Capricorn 1 and things like that. But a lot of really fascinating stuff there. It's not on the level, nothing like, I mean, this article is crap, basically. This article is just there's so much rubbish in there. But I think it served its purpose, because then years later when people could point to it and say, this is the place where the Kubrick theory started, this article on the internet, and it's a load of rubbish. And one of the people that increased so much the popularity of this article back in the 1990s was Clive Lewis. Clive Lewis was the guy who was also, a lot of people say, he was claiming that he made the synchronicity between Dark Side of the Moon and The Wizard of Oz. So we have all these little 6 degrees of separation here, all these little synchronicities between The Wizard of Oz, Kubrick, Pink Floyd, all that kind of stuff. And seems to be at the centre of it all is the person who's muddled so much of it away from the evidential things is Clyde Lewis. And Clyde Lewis was associated with people like, at the height and the heyday of the wild frontier of the internet, people like Alex Jones as well, so, and there's a lot of people out there who have nothing but good to say about Alex Jones, and Alex Jones has put some great stuff out there over the years, but the fact of the matter is, in many ways, Alex Jones is limited hangout. Again, it's like the Russell Brand thing, it's like they put a lot of, but there's some stuff. Where did the towers go? They will not touch that stuff with a barge pole. They just won't do it. They will not go there. And it seems to be more than just fear. It's, or that it isn't profitable enough for them. There seems to be much more going on. And a good recommendation for that is Andrew Johnson's books, Finding the Truth, Holding the Truth. They really do look into this idea of limited hangouts. These people who have floated around in the realms of alternative knowledge research for decades, and they corner the argument on certain esoteric subjects, certain alternative knowledge subjects, like 9/11 and all that. And I would say that Clive Lewis is one of these people. But on a final note, what's interesting is that, going back to what we were saying, because I did mention I was going to get back to Roger Waters. Roger Waters recently guested on Joe Rogan podcast, and I'm going to see if I can't put the clip up, obviously, for copyright reasons, but I'll put something up, like some stills from it. Joe Rogan asked him about the connection. Have you heard about this and all that? Roger Waters was very coy about it. It seemed initially at first like he was saying, I'd never heard about it, but it seemed very, very apparent within a few minutes that he had. And then he got really quite defensive about it, saying it's all bullshit. It doesn't, almost trying to say it doesn't sync, which it actually does. It might just be coincidence, but it does sync. And you have to play the album like 2.5 times. You have to literally, when it gets to the end of side 2, you have to go back and start the album again from the beginning. But that's bizarre, because you would think what the entirety of its album would sync up to the point where it ended. But then you start the album again, it syncs up again with the film, and then it syncs up again the third time, but it doesn't make it all the way through the album to the end of the film. But it syncs up each time. It's one of those strange things in life, that it's just so bizarre. I mean, it could just be a major coincidence. I'm not a big believer in coincidences. I think, if you keep flipping that coin and it keeps coming up heads, if it does it a dozen times, you could say, if it does it 100 times, if it's still coming up heads, something's going on. If you flip that coin 1,000 times and tails does not appear, and you've got something else going on there other than coincidence. There's something else bigger, larger at work in reality and whatever we perceive as our reality. And I think, I do believe that the whole Pink Floyd thing is probably an example of that. So maybe it is true that Roger Waters' protestations were what they were, you know, but he stood his ground on that one. Maybe he just didn't want to get into woo-woo territory. I know, you know, maybe he didn't want to besmirch his position of limited hangout on certain issues that go on in the world. Of course, that's just speculation on my part. As a final bizarre note before I close out this video, Kubrick's The Shining syncs up with The Dark Side of the Moon, even more so than The Wizard of Oz does. In fact, one surreal moment appears when Danny looks at room 237, and this syncs one of the album's ends and the lyrics "The sun is eclipsed by the moon." This has any number of significances, from the film's title Shining, as in shining light, the opposite of an eclipse, through to the room 237 motif, which is one of numerous ciphers in the film that many believe are tips of the hat by Kubrick toward the notion of NASA Apollo fakery. I'll now leave all of this, as always with Strange Tales, for you to decide. Thank you so much for watching this video. I've enjoyed it. Really appreciate you watching. Please like, share, subscribe if you can. And I will see you again very, very soon. Bye-bye for now.